Welcome to episode 4 in the video series, Making Sense of the International Energy Conservation Code for Everyday Life. I'm Hope Medina.
And I'm Gil Rossmiller, and we are with Colorado Code Consulting.
Today's topic is on the energy code and our existing buildings. One of the biggest areas a community can increase their energy efficiency is with the existing building stock. But with that, there comes so many questions. So let's go ahead and have this discussion. Join us today in our version of a fireside chat on how to use the IECC with our existing buildings. Let's figure out the answers together. Now, Gil, how does the IECC assist the users when the project is for an existing building?
So in the last couple of code cycles, we've actually created a Chapter 5 in both the commercial and residential portions of the energy code, where we've attempted to deal with nothing but existing buildings. Whereas before, the code kind of had pieces and parts kind of scattered throughout the entire energy portion. Chapter 5 at least makes an attempt to give us some direction as to what to do with existing buildings. Sometimes it's fairly clear, and other times it's as clear as mud, because we all know, right? The code is all black and white with nothing but gray in between. And so unfortunately, we've got a lot of interpretations that we need to make, depending on your different projects and getting the scope. And as we'll discuss, probably getting the scope of the project and what the intended use is going to be and what you're doing is probably one of the biggest items to have when we run into energy compliance and we're dealing with, remodels of different sites or additions and that kind of thing, which we'll talk about. But that's probably the biggest thing, is just having that wonderful conversation. I like to call it the 20 questions, meaning you sit down with a folks that are wanting to do something, they're very excited. Yes, they're very excited about doing their project. And so what they want to do is they've planned it, and now they've saved their money for it, and now we're ready to go. And they're just as excited as they can be. And so why don't we just have that conversation? Because what's our job? Our job as code officials is to do what? Right? Maybe life safety stuff. And I have a slightly different definition. Our job is to crush dreams. That's what we do. Yeah, obviously that's not what we do. But what we do have to do is inform and educate. We're theoretically the ones that know the code, and it's our job to help guide them as to what the code's going to require depending on what their project is. Then they can make an educated decision about what they do or don't want to do. Simple as that.
Now, you mentioned Chapter 5. What about Chapter 5 do you think really assists those in trying to gain compliance?
Well, actually, it's kind of split up into several different pieces. It talks about additions. So, for instance, if we're putting on an addition, it's essentially a new building. You look at the new prescriptive, you take any of the different paths that you want to do. You can certainly do a performance piece. You can certainly do just the tables, the prescriptive tables right out of there. You can do a res check if you want, a com check if you wish. You could do any of those items. When you deal with remodels, there are certain exceptions that you're allowed. Things that you don't have to worry about as far as the energy code compliance is concerned. Replacement of just the glass in the windows, for instance. The window breaks. Well, we just have to put it back kind of the way it was. You're not, required to bring it back up to code. Whereas if I'm going to replace the entire window unit, pulling the whole, do like a window replacement project, those windows need then to meet whatever the energy code edition it is that the jurisdiction has. Then you get into historic structures. Historic structures are kind of whatever it is you want to do. They're completely not ignored, but there's no requirements. You don't have to comply with the energy code. Basically, some of the newer additions say that we want a statement from the engineer or the architect that anything that we do to the inside of this building or to the building as far as the energy code is concerned will have a detrimental effect on the historic nature of the structure. But basically, historic structures, it's whatever it is they want to do. And most times when folks are actually going into historic structures, at least the plans that I've seen where they're doing it, they're actually doing quite a bit. They're actually going in and doing a lot of upgrades as far as energy is concerned, because older buildings have a tendency to really take a lot of energy to heat and cool. And so they're actually doing as much as they possibly can to maintain that historic preservation, but yet get as much as they can for energy efficiency. So I don't lose a lot of sleep when people say it's historic, so I don't have to apply the energy code, because they are. So anything that they are doing, they still need to put the insulation in correctly and size the equipment correctly, that type of stuff. So it does give you some great direction on what to do, at least preliminarily.
Oh. Well, I know we'll discuss some historical buildings here shortly, but I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the critical components that the existing building face and should be identified for projects?
Well, I think I kind of go back to what my first statement is, what's the project entail? So we get into different things like, is this going to be a change of occupancy? Is this a change of use? Change of occupancy, the code just kind of throws the book at you. It really does. It gets tough. The statement in the code is to the point where it says, if you're doing a change of occupancy, you need to show that the energy used for the building will not be any more than what the existing building was. So for instance, let's say that I do a change of occupancy in the building, whatever it might be. Generally, let's take the lighting as an example. It would say that you need to comply with everything. New lighting, watts per square foot, switching, all of those types of requirements. Daylighting controls, all of that, if we're dealing with the 15 or the 18. That's an easy one, because most people are going to do that anyway. It's easy to say that will the new building use less energy as far as the lighting is concerned? Well, absolutely. It's probably the one is what they call the low-hanging fruit when you're dealing with energy retrofits. It's the lighting, especially if you're dealing with the old stuff. Old as in T12s, very large ballast and the very large fluorescent lighting that have zero controls, no occupancy sensors, no nothing, and take a lot of watts to get the actual lumens. They take a lot of power to give the light. Whereas LEDs today, it's simple. Once you replace it, that's an easy one. Then you get into things like I don't know, change of occupancy. How about something that was an old school, of an E, and they turn it into an apartment building. That's a big one. And so now you're going to say, okay, well, how do we determine, number one, how much energy did the building use, and what are we doing to the building? And it really gets up in the air. So if I've got a building that, I don't know, maybe it's solid brick. It might be solid brick, right? So it's 3 or 4 wide brick. So now how are we going to insulate those exterior walls? Okay, I mean, it gets to be tough. The other things that we have to, when we get into this energy thing and retrofits, especially change of occupancies where the book gets thrown at you, is how is the building performing? And this is where the code doesn't really get into a lot of detail. It doesn't say, okay, well, I've got a solid brick building. How did that building perform? Meaning, when it rained, where did the water go? Did it just soak into the brick, and was a drainage plate? I mean, was it drying to the inside? Yeah, would it depend on it doing that? Was there like a sacrificial layer of plaster they were taking out because that was where all the moisture went? And now what we're going to do is we're going to go for all the walls, and we're going to put a bunch of foam on the inside. And now what have we done to how the building performs? I'm no building science expert. But I think those are some of the questions that we as designers and code officials need to ask ourselves and ask the designers, well, did you do a moisture study on that wall? How is that wall performing? And what is it you're going to do? What are you doing? Is what you're going to do make it worse than it was? Or is it actually going to improve it? Code doesn't talk about that in any way, shape, or form. And it's something, I'm not really educated on, but that's what the designers are paid for. We've got lots of folks out there that are great at building science and giving great advice as to whether that's a good idea or not. Then we get into the whole piece is, well, how much energy did that original building actually use? And even though I'm turning it into apartments, am I actually now going to use less because, gee, I'm going to replace all the windows? I'm going to, all the equipment that was in there was, old boilers maybe, and those bad boys are coming out and they were never very efficient to begin with. And now I'm putting in very high efficiency units in each one of the apartment units. I don't know, just scheming, but personally, I like to take those things. What are you doing? And are you making better than it was? That's me. If you made it better than it was, we're all moving on with life.
I mean, you bring up some very valid points. I mean, that happens to be the smallest section, I believe, in Chapter 5, but it has one of the biggest impacts just in, how it's wording. So what would be your recommendation, especially dealing on the commercial side, because I think residentially, I think it almost kind of addresses itself. But on the commercial side, how would the designer provide you the documentation or the information that you would need to deem that this project is okay per the energy code for, a change of occupancy? I mean, I know it's not just one cut and paste deal,
question. So let's take something that's even more difficult. How about this? Let's take a building that was built under the, I don't know, let's say the 2006 energy code. Okay. Let's just grab something. And it was built as a lawyer's office. Okay. Okay. And now we go in and it's not now a lawyer's office anymore and it turns into a restaurant.
Yes.
Okay. Well, now that's turning into a restaurant, it goes from a B to an A2. So let's say it's big enough, it's got more than 50, it's now an A2. Change of occupancy, there's no debate. There. Is it a change of occupancy? Yes, it's a change of occupancy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No question. Well, now what do we do? Okay. Well, what's the plan? Well, actually, we want to improve the storefront windows. We don't like the glazing that's in there. We're actually going to open it up. We're actually going to put some more windows in. So that's an easy one. Any new windows and any replacement windows will need the current code, whatever that addition happens to be. So now we're talking about, I don't know, let's get to the hard one, the thermal envelope. That's always the hard one. That's the hardest. So now what do we do? Well, we are going to take a few walls apart, like where we're putting the windows, but we have no intention of, re-roofing this flat roof. A one-story building, it's a flat roof. We really don't intend on tearing the insulation that's continuous above there, completely away. We're going to actually upgrade all the lighting, of course, all the appliances, all the HVAC units, all the mechanical stuff is going to disappear because we got completely different requirements. We've got hoods and makeup air businesses, right? All of that's going to meet the energy code easy. We'll do heat gain and heat loss calculations because, well, it's a completely different occupancy. Yeah. So generally speaking, I think when it comes to commercial things, it's typically the building's thermal envelope that's the toughie. That's the hard thing. Most of the rest of the stuff, even the domestic hot water heating and all of those things, generally speaking, and in a change of occupancy like that, they're going to replace it all anyway. I mean, it's just going to be part of the new occupancy, and that's why I think that that 20 questions things in the very beginning is an awesome conversation to have, when somebody comes up to the counter and say, or I'd like to have a meeting because you know what, I'm taking this lawyer's office and I'm making a restaurant, what am I going to have to do? Right, here are my thoughts, and I've got some specific questions. And that's a great conversation to have because, like I say, for me, I'm more down to earth. What's good sense? What makes good sense to deal with here? You know, how much, when we talk about energy and, you know, folks that get into this big time, I'm no energy geek, but it's all about how much energy is it in we talk about life cycles, we talk about all kinds of things when we deal with, quote, energy, okay? So I asked him, I said, okay, so I've now got walls that were an R13, let's say, in the '06, just for fun, and now here I'm in the 18, and pretty much any commercial, at least climate zone 5, I guess I'm taking it from climate zone 5 and above, requires continuous insulation on the outside. Okay, yeah. Well, we're not going to do that prescriptively. We're going to try to trade it off. Well, 9 times out of 10, the only way you're going to trade that thermal envelope stuff off is putting more insulation in the ceiling. That's the biggest bang for the buck. You know, you're not going to get it by putting a bunch of insulation in the walls. So to me, how much time and energy have we wasted, okay, tearing all this stuff down, throwing it into the dumpster, taking it all apart, putting in what we can, tearing off the roof? Really? Have we really done anything there? Are they going to be replacing the roof? I'd be willing to bet they are. Yes. Deal with it then. Don't make them do it now. Okay? I mean, that's another conversation about the whole re-roofing thing. But what I'm saying is what makes good sense. Then we have commercially things that we call just a change of use. Okay?
Yes.
So let's say we had a lawyer's office, and it now becomes a dentist. It's still a B occupancy. Mm-hmm. No occupancy change, but has the use changed?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure it has. As far as the energy code concerned, lighting is probably the biggest thing in Chapter 5. It says if the watts per square foot have changed from that use to the other use, even though it's within the same occupancy, okay? The lighting needs to come up. Any of the controls, any of that stuff needs to come up. And if it's the old lighting, they're going to be doing it anyway. If it's an older, remodel, they're going to do. But as far as the thermal envelope, mechanical equipment, any of that kind of stuff, can all stay the same. That, unless you happen to be doing something, we can get into that now if you want. I mean, we get into things like, well, when I tear the wall apart, what do I got to do? Well, if I'm in a commercial auction, I tear the wall apart, I'm going to say, well, let's put back in a little bit more than what we had if we possibly could, and let's move on with life.
Yeah.
If we only got spaces for 3.5 inches, I'm not going to make you, fur the wall out. Put in some high density stuff instead of the, maybe you can get an R15 instead of the R11 or the 13 that was in there, and let's call it good. Okay. I don't know.
Well, I think those are very valid points when you're talking about a change of occupancy or a change of use. So how would you, how would you like to discuss how to deal with an alteration? And an alteration, for both on the residential side of things and the commercial side of things. And how would one, really address the energy requirements when dealing with alterations?
Yeah, so that kind of gets back into our change of use thing. And let's say it was a lawyer's office, and it's going to be a lawyer's office. Okay, It's going to be a restaurant. It was a restaurant, and it's just another restaurant that's moving in. Okay, basically alterations is anything that you basically touch as far as the energy compliance is concerned. You need to update to the new code. So for instance, if I'm replacing the rooftop units because they're old or they don't have the capacity that you need for the new occupancy, or what's up there is just too darn big and old anyway, and let's get something more efficient and more sized correctly. Any of that new stuff would need to comply. Any new windows, if you change more than, I think it's 10% now, of the lighting in any space in an alteration, meaning when the code says space, it's not the entire space. The space is like an office within the unit. So if I change more than 10% of lighting in that space or that office, lighting compliance and the controls need to come up to current code. And the same type of thing for residential. Any new lighting would, 75%, or now it's 90%, I think, and well, we'll be in the 21. I think it's what, 75% now in the 18. It just needs to be high efficacy, LEDs.
90%.
Is it 90%? Okay.
It is.
Too many codes. Thinking about the 24 already, if you can believe it. Residentially, it's just the lighting. Any new lighting is going to be LED or high efficacy. When you get into the walls themselves, the thermal envelope, again, if you touch it, you need to bring it up to code. So all kinds of remodels that go on in houses. Oh my gosh. Bathrooms, for instance, you go.
Perfect. How would you deal with the bathroom remodel?
Yeah, so let's say I'm going to go into the bathroom remodel. It's a house that's, I don't know, in real need of a remodel. Let's just put it that way. And we just gut the bad boy. We just gut it. Floors, walls, and we've got an exterior wall just for the fun of it, because why not? Let's always put the tub and the shower on an exterior wall. It's simply the worst place to put it, but that's where they all are. Let's just face it. And of course, we pull that all out, and of course, there's maybe a little bit of moisture that's got in there, and we have to replace a few of the studs or whatever we've got to do because it's just toast. Okay, it's going to be a 2x4. So you take a production home, the 1960s or 70s. It might have brick veneer or something outside, but it's all wood stud frame. It's all wood studs. And it's only going to be 3.5 inches. That's all it's going to be. Okay? We will not be, because the code basically says, hey, if you open up the cavity and there's no insulation in it, you're going to fill the cavity. If you open up that cavity and pull all the insulation out, you're going to go to the prescriptive table. Yeah, well, no, we're not doing that. We're going to put what you can back in that cavity. R15 bad, or maybe they like to put spray foam in there or something. We're not going to make it worse than it was. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then let's say we didn't do that bathroom remodel because it was old. We did it because there was a leak and it's an insurance claim.
Ah.
So now it's not an alteration, it's simply a repair. Okay? This fun stuff. Isn't this why the 20 questions are so much fun? Yes.
I love 20 questions.
Yes, 20 questions. So to find out, well, there was a leak and, the tub overflowed and, insurance. Oh, okay, what are you going to do? Well, it got into everything. Oh, okay, what are you going to put back? Well, all they have to do is put back exactly what was there. That's the difference. So now it's simply a repair and it's not an alteration or remodel. Okay, so that's what
Chapter 5 does have a section in there that deals with repairs so that you can fall back on that.
Yeah, and just say, hey, repair. Hey, if it's a repair or maintenance, maintaining, right? Any of that stuff. We're just, because the code allows that. I mean, every time we adopt a new code, anything that we built, even to the prior code is now does not comply. Well, that doesn't mean you have to go back and fix every house and every building in jurisdiction. I mean, that's just insanity, right? No, it just means that it's existing non-conforming. Hey, if it was legally there when you adopted the new code, we all go on with life. House gets a certificate of occupancy, a CO, we're done. All right, we're done. Okay. So bathroom remodels or repairs, kitchens are the same way. Any of that, kitchen remodel or kitchen repair, I would treat the same way. So how about a basement finish?
Oh yes, how would you deal with a basement finish?
How about that? So folks buy the house, they move in, we got a CO, 8, 9, 10 years later, said, you know what? It's time. We need, we've got the kids, right? They need their own stinking space. Stinking kids anyway.
We need our sanity.
I'm telling you. So the House has a CO, yes?
Yeah.
We are now done with the energy code. How do you like that statement? Is that a good one?
I think you need to elaborate a little bit more on that
statement. Let's take it one piece at a time.
All right, that sounds
let's
great.
talk about the thermal envelope. So when I built that house, I didn't have to put any insulation on the outside walls. No drape, no nothing. Wasn't required. Today's code says, yes, you're going to do it. Okay? So if I were building a new basement, I would require the insulation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a new basement. The basement already exists. So when somebody comes in, I mean, I had lots of these when I was in Parker. Oh my gosh. I'd probably say 70% of the houses at the time we went to actually finding compliance with the energy code, there was no insulation in the basement walls. So when they come in for a basement finish, the guys say, well, you have to insulate the outside walls. I said, well, why? Does the house have a CO? Yeah. Or are they building a new basement wall? Well, no. Well, then they don't have to insulate it. Gil's opinion, there's others that perhaps disagree with that. But I would say, oh, finishing the basement? Yeah, look at the plan. Oh, cool. What are you going to do with the walls? Well, we're going to firm out. We're going to put in some insulation. Good. And I move on to the next step. I don't tell them they don't have to do it. When they say, well, what do I have to put into an R value? And I say, well, what were you planning on putting in? Hopefully I get them to volunteer something rather than saying, well, what's required to put in? Because then I'd say none. I said, but you're going to want to put something more than nothing. You're putting this in together. Why not throw in some, an R13 bat or something? Okay, it's going to help with fire blocking. It's going to, help with some stuff. So why not? Okay, 9 times out of 10 people are insulating their walls. But as far as that's, Gil's opinion, they haven't changed it. It's existing, non-conforming, and unless I'm building a brand new basement wall, I don't have to do it. Right?
Now, what would you say if that basement was unconditioned and now it's going to be conditioned, because it does state in the code?
We will save that thought for the next conversation.
All right. Well,
we will continue with the basement. We will continue with the basement. Make a little note, and we'll come back to that.
All right.
So basement finish, I say insulate the walls or not. As long as you got a seal, we're good. Okay. So now let's go to everything else. So one would hope that the HVAC system was designed to include the basement because it was conditioned, may not have been finished at the time, but certainly part of the conditioned area of the house. Older houses, even if it wasn't, believe me, the air conditioning and the furnace are plenty large enough. Hopefully that the HVAC persons has the wherewithal to get the ductwork and things put in there correctly. Word to the wise, for those jurisdictions that have actually started doing manual J, S, and D, heat gain and heat loss calculations, and have design systems, draw a line. Draw a line so that when those systems have been designed. So in April 2005, we can pretty much say everything from here on out. Production homes, we've got a design system, because what you don't want to do is have homeowners start cutting holes in their trunk lines and add these things willy-nilly, because it'll screw up the rest of the system. It will. Okay. So it's just a word to the wise. Okay. That's all. Then we get to any of the plumbing fixtures, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, there's really not a lot there. You're going to have to, if you put in a recirc line, you might have to insulate it. So anything that you're adding that's new in that basement finish is going to meet the energy code. Any of the lighting you're putting in, again, 75% or 90% high efficacy lamps, that's T8 or smaller, any kind of an LED complex fluorescence, not that they're around much anymore, but any of those would work. And so the rest of that basement pretty much would need, the thermal envelope is the only thing that's in the question because it's already existing. So anything that you do new, so if you place the windows in the basement, you know, any of those would have to be up to new code. So now we'll go back to what it is you wanted before. What was it? You jotted it down.
I did. Actually, it was discussing if the basement had been unconditioned
Oh, right.
or unheated before,
Right.
and now you were going to
Wow.
heat or condition the space.
This is another one where the Energy Code says, oh, both residentially and commercially. Oh, the space was not conditioned before, and now you're making it conditioned space. You see everything for new construction? Just do that. Very simple answer. That again becomes very difficult. You need to you need to work with whatever whatever the project is. Commercial ones get very technical and much harder to do. But you work with the designer and you get, believe me, getting it better than it was. I mean, there's a lot of warehouses, you know, Denver, I expect a lot of big cities, right? Warehouses that are turning into condos, yes? Mm-hmm. Right? Retail on the first floor, whatever, condos on the upper floors. Most 9 times out of 10, those are solid brick structures, trying to get things up to the energy code. So again, you get back to how did the building perform, and are we going to do something worse than if we just, you know, left it alone, type of conversation. So that's a harder one. Residentially, probably the biggest one that you do that's like that is the garage.
That is an excellent point. So in a garage, there are a couple of things happening when it comes to a garage. One, you are either now changing the condition of the garage because you are wanting to add some heat for various reasons, or you're trying to convert that garage space into living space because, you know, the kids move back in and you need the space for them and they would like to have their own kind of separate space. Right. So how would the energy code address both, you know, now conditioning a garage for heat, and how does it deal with it when you're converting a garage into living space?
Actually, it's fairly simple. Any of those things, just tear the slab up, start by tearing all the walls, and you should be fine.
Oh, great advice, Gil. Great advice.
No. Yeah, there are those, believe me. So let's take different situations. Let's say, hey, I'm going to turn my garage into my living room. It's going to be another bedroom. Okay. Mm-hmm. So to me, that is intense, right? We're actually making it part of the house. We're adding to the square footage. We're doing lots of stuff. We are going to find compliance with the energy code as much as we possibly can. Okay. So let's take several different scenarios. Generally, let's just say it's 2x4 walls. We're in climate zone 5 and up. What are we going to do? Well, you're going to try to trade off as much as you can. You could do a res check just on that room itself to see what you would need to do. Okay. You could do a res check and call it an alteration. It's really kind of a new space. You might even call it an addition at a point, but it's going to treat it like a new building, which you're actually really doing. Yes, you're taking unconditioned space and making it conditioned. So will you be able to do some trade-offs? Will you be able to actually insulate the walls enough? We don't have any ceiling in it. We're just going to say that in this particular, well, it could be either way. You could have one that has a living space above and really won't have any, quote, ceiling insulation because it's, right, not part of the thermal envelope. It's already got conditioned space above it. Or it doesn't. Let's say it doesn't. Let's say the garage has an attic above it. Well, you would just have to insulate it as much as needed to get past on that res check. Because what you probably are trading off on that is if you're not actually framing another floor over the concrete slab and you're not tearing the concrete slab up, you're going to be trading off the slab edge insulation, because 9 times out of 10, that's less than 12 inches below grade. I mean, it's essentially at grade, right?
Yeah.
Certainly is where you pull the car in, you know. The rest of it may not be, but 9 times out of 10 it is. So typically that's what you're trading off, is that slab on grade. The garage doors are going to disappear. You're going to frame walls and maybe put, you know, windows in there, and there'll be, you know, egress windows and smoke detection and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, anything to do is going to happen. So probably the biggest, probably the best path is to try to do the res check and try to do a trade-off. And if you're not able to trade off that slab edge, you're going to have to work with the jurisdiction to see what you can do and just move on with life. Okay. Any kind of a new, there's some exceptions in there for heat duct runs. You can do a certain length and not really have to do a new design for it. It depends on how big the garage is and relative to the size of the house and how new the system is, and, you know, was it ever designed with it. If it's an older house and it was never designed, again, the furnace and air conditioner with twice the size needed to begin with, so they got plenty of oomph, plenty of size. It just might be the ductwork that you need to do to maybe extend. If it's a smaller, I mean, if it's just a 300, 400 square foot garage, you probably easily put the ductwork in there. But if it's like some garages that are a little larger than that, it might have 1,000 square foot garage and it's only 1,000 square foot house. I've just now doubled the size. And so, yeah, so you might now need to do a new calc on that to get it done right. A new, if it's a forced air system, your duct sizing and that kind of thing to make sure it's conditioned. The other thing you could do is you could actually, if they plan on framing a floor in there, which some do, you would just insulate the floor just like you would any place else because it's part of the thermal envelope. You'd make sure your air barriers are in there and all of that, and just insulate the floor and put it into your S check, and you'd pass with flying colors. You could probably just do it almost prescriptively at that point, and especially if you just spurred out the walls another 1.5 inches and got your R20 bats in there, your R21 high density bats, or put foam in there. You could probably just do it prescriptively because you can blow the attic. You just put a attic access up there, or drop the put the ceiling in if there wasn't a lid on there before. With that, and then you have. So I think we covered turning it into real space. Yes.
Yes. My only question for you is, how would you address that big hole in the wall called the garage vehicle door?
Yeah, but so I was going to move on to the next scenario for garages. So we just went through the whole, I'm turning it into a living space.
Okay.
Right. Now let's talk about, all I do is change the oil in my car and the spark plugs and stuff. And so what I want to do is I'm just going to put a unit heater in there, and all I'm doing, I'm just going to turn it on when I change the oil. That's all I'm going to do. Well,
so
I might
keep
it at like 45 degrees so that the car starts easier and stuff too. I might do that. Yeah. Okay. So personally, okay, it's not full disclosure. I have a unit heater in my garage. Okay, and here in Minnesota, cars freeze. They don't melt like they do in Colorado. I'm just telling you. They freeze solid, okay? So I keep it at about 40, 45 degrees during the winter. It's off now, obviously, it's summer. But it's the thermal envelopes certainly doesn't mean go. I can tell you that. We're close, but we're not there. So let's take an existing house, and this is where it'll end up having, not generally new construction. New construction, we're going to take 2 scenarios here, because I would handle each differently.
Okay. I
have an existing house, 15 years old. Okay, I move in. It's like, you know what? I'm going to put a unit heater in the garage. Oh, okay. Are the walls insulated at all? Do you have any windows in there? Okay. Do you have an insulated garage door? Is the ceiling insulated? Okay. These are the questions, it's the whole 20 questions thing. Well, I don't know. There's sheetrock on the wall already. Well, you're going to have to find out, because I'm not going to let you just put a unit heater in there with no insulation in the walls. Because here's the deal. The code is going to say this: I'm now turning unconditioned space into conditioned space. You're starting all over again. That is what the code says, okay? Now I'm getting into what makes good sense. What makes good sense? Let's think about why we're using it. Is it a living space? Well, no, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is give it a little bit of heat for a little bit of time, partially, and moving on with life. So am I going to make them insulate the walls? Absolutely. Am I going to make them get the insulation in the ceiling, whatever there might be? Yes, I'm going to make them do that. If there's windows in there, they better not be single pane. It better be at least thermal pane, and they better be, insulated glass, okay? And they better have insulated garage doors, okay? I am not going to make them tear up the slab and try to insulate the slab, okay? Is it possible? Is it possible that they could do a res check? Yes, it is possible. I think that's going to be difficult. I just don't know they're going to get it, because number one, although we do have a garage door standard now in the energy code that they need to make a certain standard, probably the thing that really kills them is airtightness.
Yeah.
That's the killer. It's really tough to get those things airtight in any way, shape, or form. Coil doors, they make coil doors. They're awesome, but they're a little bit more expensive. Yeah. Just a tad bit more. They're awesome. Insulated, sealed, coil. Oh, they're awesome. Commercial application, obviously, right? And I mean, I just did a plan review with it. It's just a really nice coil door. It's nice, but man, oh man, do the math. So I think, what does the code say? Code says if it becomes, unconditioned to conditioned, got to meet the energy code. And there's going to be many code officials that feel uncomfortable doing anything but getting a res check and say, well, how are you trading it off? Okay. And I'll tell you, the stickler, it's always going to be the slab edge stuff, and it's always going to be that stinking overhead garage door. And it really was. And before the 2018, I told folks, I said, as long as it's at least insulated and they do a decent job of sealing it, let's all move on with life. Okay. Now at least we have a standard that we can go back to. How good that is, or I don't even know. I haven't even looked up how many garage doors meet this standard. I haven't even looked it up, to be quite honest. I should do that after we do the video, or maybe we should look up now. Anyway, so that's the whole garage thing. Garages are hard. They just, because it's black and white. It really is, right? So it really gets down to the 20 questions and how comfortable the jurisdiction is, and the safe play. The play that's safe for the jurisdiction is to do a res check, and then do the best you can with the garage door, and go to the 18 and at least get it so it meets that listing.
So would you say, especially for garages, there's that part of the code that says the intent meeting, basically meeting
Right.
the intent of the code.
Right.
And I would think of that as, the intent of the code is to, do energy conservation. And in existing structures, I mean, that could be something, drastic as far as, like maybe putting in that coil door. That's going to be a huge energy conservation if we're talking about, a 75-year-old building, where there hasn't been a whole lot of any energy provisions that have gone in. But even if you have a home that was built to the 2015 IECC, which was a very, strong energy code for a residential home, I still feel like that word, the intent, really comes into play when you're dealing with existing structures, because as you stated, you can do as much as you possibly can, but if you already have the footprint and you're trying to work within that footprint, I don't see that you're going to be able to 100% of the time meet 100% of the energy code.
I would absolutely agree, and I think that I personally am more comfortable with making those quote calls as a building official, but you're going to have lots that aren't, and that's why I say that's why the com check and the res check can provide at least a level of comfort to say, hey, you passed that, you could trade it off, it's legal, let's move on with life. I just feel more comfortable saying, hey, you know what, you've done the best you could, you did it. You know, it's like, okay, well, I guess you're just going to have to tear the slab up, just cut an edge all the way around, or just excavate the exterior, and you should be fine. Okay, I just don't, I'm just not there with that, especially if I'm just putting in a unit heater. And then it gets to the point, well, then how do you know they just won't crank that bad boy and it'll be 70 degrees in there all the time? Well, yeah, well, what if they start actually opening up a car repair shop in that garage? So we need to make that an S1 and do a separation between the two. And I don't know, probably fire suppression would be a really good idea. You know, I don't play the what if game. I trust, I believe what folks tell me until proven otherwise. You can't do it any other way. You just can't. You can't say, well, you're lying. Yeah, well, no, you can't do that. You might think it, but you can't do that. Well, so you take them a word, you document it, you just say, hey, here it is, this is the plan, let's move on with life, okay? Now, when the next homeowner comes in and says, how the heck did you allow this to go on? That guy's keeping that thing at 70 degrees. Well, that's not what we approved. That's not how he said he was going to use it. And you're right. What a total waste of money, man. I bet you he was paying a lot of money to heat that bad boy at 70 degrees. I'm telling you right now. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of gets into it, right? People just can't afford that. I mean, it gets literally expensive to do it. You know, it's just like, well, I'm not going to put in unit heater. I'm going to actually put in electric baseboard. Oh, well, there you go. That's a real cost-effective solution, at least when you install it. Now, the mere fact that it's near 100% efficient, it cost $1 million to run. It is simply the most expensive thing that you can put in, right? Especially in a space that may not have all the insulation that you could possibly have. So again, it just gets down to folks. They won't pay for it. They're gonna run it. It's just like you know, the old gas fireplaces that didn't really put any heat out. People thought, oh, this is beautiful, right? This is like, then they get their gas bill. It's like, we're not running that thing ever again, right? Yes.
It was good while it lasted.
I mean, there's, you know, folks. Human nature starts to take over. You know, they just can't afford it. And those that can, fine, run it. I mean, you know, whatever, it's theirs. But for, you know, most folks like us, you know, we're not made of money, and we're not going to spend $300 a month just to heat the garage.
So would you say, with both, you know, with all the provisions that you find for both the residential and the commercial, even though the sections in Chapter 5 state, you know, basically that you're required to comply with the energy code, you know, as if it was new construction, you know, gives you that. But in every one of those sections, you know, they have these exceptions. You know, you open the cavity or the, you know, the walls and the cavities have insulation, or the roof, or whatever the case may be. Even though when you look at Chapter 5, you know, just at first glance, it has that I'm really strict deal, but then there's that realization that, hey, we're dealing with something that's existing. And so we want to make sure that you have these, you know, specific capabilities to say, okay, this is good, but where you can make improvements, you know, please do, kind of deal.
And so try to put that in code language. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I think they
so
made a fairly good attempt at putting it into
there's an attempt. So there's, you know, on the 21, there were several attempts to try to clarify commercial building re-roofs. There's several pieces in there, okay? And so there's a lot of times, and of course the biggest concern is if I'm just, re-roofing, if I'm just, putting another layer over the top, okay, I'm not tearing up any old stuff, yeah, you're good, let's move on with life. If you're just taking off the roofing itself and not disturbing the insulation, you're fine, just move on with life. Then there's well, I'm going to do the re-roof, and it doesn't have any insulation at all. Okay, am I exposing the cavities? Am I not? Is it continuous above the decking? Before, was it not? These are all the questions that start to come up. And of course, there was several attempts to try to clarify that. And of course, the more they did it, the harder it got to be. And the language just got to be difficult. And there was, 8 ways to interpret it, and it got to be difficult. To me, we can't make it any worse. So let's take a typical commercial roof, continuous insulation above the deck. Okay, pretty tip. They're coming in, it was a wood structure and it leaked, and now the wood's rotten, and so we got to scrape that bad boy up and replace some sheathing. There might be some structural, whatever. Okay, so we got to get it fixed. Well, now how much insulation we put back? Well, code says it's simple. Just put back the prescriptive. It's fine. The mere fact that there was only an inch on there and you need 5 inches, simply a minor detail. Yeah, no. Personally, I think that it gets tough. There was a try to read. They tried to write that in. When you start to talk about going from 1 inch to 5 inches, as an example, think about the scuppers on the outside of the parapet wall. Think about the HVAC curbs that are already on there. And now, are we now lifting all the units off the roof and building up the curbs more and moving all the scuppers? Was that really the intent? And have we now saved that much, quote, energy to make that worthwhile? That's what, an owner looks at, says, I'm going to spend an extra $150,000 on this roof to do this. Where am I going to get that back? Is that actually going to happen? Because I don't pay for the energy, the tenants do, right? Okay, that's the reality. So I think that my philosophy is we can't make it worse than it was. That's not happening. Bottom line. If there's no insulation, we're going to put as much as we possibly can without having to do extra stuff, raising curbs, moving, scuppers and, overflow drains or whatever it might be through the parapet wall. We're going to make it better. We have roofs. We just did one that it was a house, and I want to call it a kind of a California style, but it was really a kind of a post and beam house, and the roof was awesome. Oh my gosh, you walk into the inside, huge, fir beams that are just gorgeous, and fir tongue and groove sheathing, okay? And you looked up and thought, man, that's awesome. And of course, they were doing a re-roof, okay? And the pitch was like, nothing. 212 was ridiculous. It was a big flat roof. Maybe give me a kind of a California style place, right?
Yeah.
And I said, man, that's really gorgeous. Now all you have to do is just put all the insulation in, cover it all up, sheetrock it, and you should be fine. They didn't see the humor in that. Of course, I'm in tears. I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, I said, of course not. Of course, it's gorgeous. You don't want to cover this up. That's insanity. I said, so what's the plan? Because of course, then it was R38.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now it's 49. Well, I'm talking climate zone 5. That's what's in my head, okay? That's where this was. I said, so what's the plan? She says, actually, we've got, we just have to tear the roof off. There's some leakage, and you could see some leakage around the edges where it was, we needed to get the, sheathing replaced, because that's all that was between the inside and the outside was basically 7/8 inch tongue and groove.
Oh.
That was it. That's how those places were built, right? That's just how it was. So I said, well, what's the plan? She says, well, we're going to scrape it. We're going to get rid of everything up there, repair what we've got to repair. And I said, well, that makes sense. And he says, then we're actually going to use the 3-inch foam. It's 3-inch foam with the sheathing that's attached to it. I can't remember the name, but then they actually fasten that then down and then put the roofing on top of that. And I said, really? I said, that's going to take a lot of work because all the fascia and all of this flashing and all of that stuff is going to have to change. She goes, yeah. He says, yeah, but right now there's nothing, and the homeowner's tired of paying through the nose to heat and cool his place because it's all going through the roof.
Yeah.
And I said, well, works for me because you're now making it 100% better than it was, right? And I said, I said, the code's R38. He says, well, we can get stuff that's an R30 and not have to do anything fantastic. And I said, fine, move on with life. Works for me because it's a whole lot better than it was.
Okay.
Now it's structurally adequate. We're not overloading the roof, right? They had the plan to do it. Works for me. All I had to do was give them a little note or send an email. He said, can you give us a letter? That's what code officials hate. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Right? Can you give us a letter that says that? No, the town attorney really doesn't like me doing letters. You could send me an email with a question. Hey, we just met out there. Just send me an email talking about this conversation we just had, and then I can say, you know what, that's an excellent plan. And there you go. Give it to your insurance company and move on with life. Okay? Because that's what, so as well, if the code makes you do it, right?
Yeah.
So they went through the whole thing, and that was what I kept for my record. I said, you told us it was an R38, but what we can get is an R30. Currently, we have 0. Would this be an acceptable alternative? And that's why I said there's a lot of jurisdictions that may not be comfortable with that. I am. I was certainly comfortable with that and could say that in a court of law saying, well, they had nothing and they went to something. Nope, you're right. It wasn't 100% code, but you know what? That's what we could do without spending $1 million. You like it or not, they don't have to like the decision, but it wasn't an idiotic one either. It was something, the quote normal man might do.
So what are some of the provisions of Chapter 5 of the IECC? Do you think, homeowners and building owners and architects and designers, really should be aware of that they can utilize with their work when they're dealing with their existing buildings?
Yeah, they really need to take a peek at that, because even if you look at the existing building code, even if you're doing the prescriptive path or, the different work levels, 1, 2, or 3 in there, energy, just go to the energy code. That's what it says. So you get, even if you start in the existing building code book, it bounces you right back to the energy code, to Chapter 5, and then starts to give you that direction. And I think the best advice I can give for anybody, commercial or residentially, we're doing, major remodels or additions or changing that garage into conditioned space or taking that warehouse and turning it into condos, is to go prepared with a series of questions and proposals. You say, this is what we're proposing on doing. Don't just go there and say, what are you going to make us do? Okay? Because if I sat down and said, well, it's easy, it was a condition, no. Are you making a condition? Yes. Well, then it's just like a new building. Did you have another question? Okay. You need to come with something more than nothing, and don't and say, hey, here's what we're planning on doing. What are your thoughts? Do you think this meets the intent? Because you're right. Not only are we changing occupancy, we're going from unconditioned to conditioned, and here are the limitations we have. Okay. And just come with some background. Hey, if we start putting foam on the inside of the building, this is how it performs, and it's not going to drain right. It's actually going to build up water in the structure, and it's just going to start to deteriorate. So here's our proposal. Okay. You just need to educate the code official on this stuff, because a lot of they're right or wrong, good or bad. There are a lot of code folks that are saying, energy code, schmenergy code. Who cares? It's really not a quote life safety thing. We just don't have the time. We've got a dozen other stinking books that we've got to pay attention to, and we just don't have time to deal with that energy stuff. So use it as a time for designers to provide a little bit of education, to say this is how walls work. Building science to them just might be, we haven't even thought about it, right? The mere fact that you've got insulation, they're fine, whatever. Okay? That's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And I think just by trying to provide that education to show that you've done your homework and that you do have a path to get there from here, that's not unreasonable. It may not work with everybody. It certainly hasn't worked for me for everybody. I'll just tell you that. There are other jurisdictions that just don't buy off on that. They're pretty black and white, which that's the way it is. I mean, I'm not going to debate that one way or the other. But I think that's the thing. I think just do your homework. Get yourself educated about the type of building, because everyone's going to be different. Every single one's going to be different, from solid brick to metal frame to steel buildings to metal buildings. They're all different. And now what am I putting inside? Am I putting a swimming pool? Or is it just going to be apartments? Or is it going to be a factory? I'm going to turning into a grow facility, perhaps. I mean, right? It just depends. And that's why I think that, I started out with that, and I just can't emphasize the 20 questions, man. The code official's got to be not only willing to ask the questions, but willing to listen, especially when they don't know. I don't know everything. I certainly don't claim to. But I'd like to think that most folks are smart enough to ask the smart questions and then do a little research. Call them, call your folks, call the other code officials, the people in your chapter, and heck, call us. We'll tell you if it's a bunch of hogwash or not, or if they're being reasonable. It doesn't sound unreasonable. So I don't know. Sometimes it's tough, and that's when you reach out. I reach out. Heck, I just reached out this morning to say, hey, I don't know, what do we do about these podium building floors, and how does that work? I don't know. I got my thoughts. Maybe there's some new thoughts out there.
So I would say, as part of our, leaving thoughts on this, is basically, excuse me, is, with these existing buildings, we want to make them better than they are. The reality is they're not going to be fully compliant with the energy code, but they're not going to be any worse than what they were before, and to be open to having that discussion and be prepared to have that discussion. I'd like to thank Gil Rossmiller for providing us with his insight, opinion, and interpretation on how to use Chapter 5 for existing buildings in our video series, Making Sense of the International Energy Conservation Code for Everyday Life. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Building Code Sense. Follow us on Facebook at Colorado Code Consulting LLC, and visit our website at www.coloradocode.net. The funding for this video was provided by Excel Energy.
And no natural gas was used during the filming of this video.